This is excellent. So let me do my little introduction. Welcome to everybody that is listening here. I've also gone live on my Meticulous Prime on Instagram, and I'm inviting everyone to consider. Hello, if you've just joined me on Instagram Live, I invite you to go to substack.com and look for Dystopia Unmasked. That is where this conversation is taking place right now. Every Wednesday, we will be having conversations with Alexander Carberry over there at Dystopia Unmasked at substack.com for reasons that need no further explanation. This particular platform is not amenable to freedom of speech, as we have to watch what we say after we've spoken and might be punished. Freedom of speech is not if there isn't freedom after speech. And that has been proven for the past how many months? 16, 17 months on this platform, as we have been simply prohibited from speaking the facts that our eyes and our ears are picking up from the killing fields in the Middle East, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, in Sudan, and in the world over as we speak right now. Not to be forgotten, Ukraine, um, where Russia has been conducting carnage and where imperial politics have been unfolding in ways that we will be talking about in the course of this particular program, where the focus until, please correct me if I get it wrong, until April 27th, we will be exploring necropolitics and the depth of what that means. And we strongly encourage those of you who tune in to adopt this vocabulary, not because it's fancy, but because it's clarifying, because it's demystifying, because it's unmasking the, well, sad reality that we were born into. We live in a
Hmm.
world that is necropolitical. We live in a world that is a multi-tier world with levels in a hierarchy, levels and layers of exploitation. Now, we could focus on exploitation, as Alex's articles have since last year, on exploitation between groups of humans, between what can be called the center and the periphery, an unequal pattern of exchange and extraction. But there is something even deeper that was discussed in the very recent podcast conversation between Khadija and Alexander Carberry, who are part of this network, of this collective that is Dystopia Unmasked. And in that conversation, something very fundamental was brought up. And I'd like to explore that further in this conversation. Nature, the relation between human beings, the humanosphere, and the biosphere. The humanosphere being the realm within which economics unfold, international relations unfold, the realm within which consumption, production unfolds, extraction um, at the beginning of it all. So there is prospection. Let's see if I get it together, Alex. What do humans do? What does the humanosphere do in the biosphere, in the ecosphere? What we do is prospection in search of basic raw materials or resources to be then transformed to be extracted and then transformed through production, and after production, to be consumed, and after consumption, to be discarded as waste, household waste for the consumers. And in the production process, industrial waste is produced. Different degrees and levels of waste, and a very disreputable, unfair exchange for Mother Nature or Father Nature or whatever gender we want to assign to that from which all um, stems that lives. It's a very unequal exchange. We extract minerals, we extract living goods, food, oxygen, and we pour it all back as waste, household waste, industrial waste. And the consequence of that is depletion and pollution. Hence, one of my favorite jokes is GDP stands for gross depletion pollution economics, not gross domestic product. Well, both is one little gem I'll throw in. And another point I'd like to make is from the work that you know that I was doing in the past 20 years, we had another um, interesting, instructive pointer, which is that humans have basic needs. Humans have basic needs can be discussed. These needs are more fundamental than rights. Rights being the attempt by humans to codify those needs that are absolutely conflictual, that if we don't codify them into law, they will over and over again and again lead to clashes within the humanosphere and human society. So we have rules and laws, but
Hmm.
underlying those rules and laws, there are basic human needs: sanitation, water, food, climatic adaptation, temperature, clothes, education, um, housing. These are the basic needs.
Hmm.
Freedom for the more abstract, non physical ones, identity, the right to be who we were born to be um, in our lives. Of
Hmm.
course, so freedom, safety, well being, wealth, and identity. And that begs the question, and I'll give over to you. What are nature's basic needs? If we stop centering our existence on this planet, on us, what would nature's basic needs be?
I think, I think, as always, one has to step back a bit
Hmm.
because we are part of the natural world, and as part of the natural world, if we do not recognize that, and we continue to think as if the natural world is over there and we are here and we have different needs, and our needs are fundamentally different, we'll
Hmm.
always run into trouble.
Hmm.
The thing is that we are part of the world, and we need the world to be healthy in order that we are also healthy. Because if the world is sick, then we will also be sick. So the need of the world is the need that it must be nurtured. It must be used with a knowledge that it must be that you must nurture it. You cannot, if you take out of it more than you give back to it, or you take out of it in a manner that does not acknowledge gratitude and the need to give back, then it, you you damage the fundamentals of the relationship in the same way that you damage the fundamentals of any relationship.
Exactly. And the damage is what I was alluding to
Mm-hmm.
um, in these two categories. It appears to be
Mm-hmm.
quite an encompassing approach to assessing the damage
Mm-hmm.
that occurs in the human to nature relation. As you say, we are a part of nature, and you know this conversation, this part of the conversation, perhaps to make it explicit, is important to me because I believe that it helps understand. And please correct me if that's incorrect. Understand better the essence of the concept of overgrowing. It has something to do, I feel, with ecology. It has something to do with ecosystems and with the viability of ecosystems.
Yeah, I mean, and but it is based on the recognition that we are an ecosystem with ecosystems, with sub ecosystems. I mean, as a human being, part of ecosystems.
Mm-hmm.
So anything that we do to that, we also do to ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so that, as part of that ecosystem, once we recognize that we must live in it in a way that gives health to it, then by that we overgrow the insanity of this extractive necropolitical order that we are part of.
Yes.
We are saying that the necropolitical basis of economy and the way that we think of our separation is insanity.
Mm-hmm. 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 Now, we've you've been pointing out in your elaborate writings that overgrowing seems to be the path to I it's it's a sensitive kind of topic because the situation in which we are reminds me of Einstein. We're living in a world, living in a mode that pollutes and that
Mm-hmm.
depletes. So it depletes the resources, it
Mm-hmm.
transforms them. In the process of transformation, it pollutes not only for the biosphere and other creatures, but for ourselves. Oh, I see the word stewardship. Stewardship. That might help me formulate better. So, in the comment section. So there is there is something of stewardship in the nature of the practice of overgrowing, stewardship of our own destiny. If I remember that correctly, is a strong element in there.
Mm-hmm.
Stewardship of our own destiny, sort of extracting ourselves from the modes of alienation and production that have us encrusted in the modes, economic modes that we live in, our dependencies, the mortgage that you've mentioned so many times in your articles, that ties people into a system where they are, where they, where we all experience ourselves as fractal echoes of a mode of exploitation that exploits us, depletes the ecosystem, and pollutes us and the ecosystem.
Yeah, because I think one of the things that you see is that the our economies organize us in particular ways. They organize the way we think. They organize the way that we relate. They organize how we relate to the world in particular ways.
Yes.
And and in it, what you are encouraged to do as an activist is to stand against that. And in overgrowing, what we're saying is that standing against that is a mistake. What we have to do is recognize that it is insane, turn away from it, and build beyond it, so that we are not reacting and being defined by being against insanity, because the danger with that is that if you enter into their logic, you become as insane as them. So this is about turning around to what we must do as stewards of of this earth and
This
of
is
ourselves.
I need a minute here because this gives me goosebumps.
Mm.
This the everything you just said gave me goosebumps because the intellectual shift that is required in the face of insanity, let's call it that.
Mm-hmm.
And perhaps we could spend some time defining the insanity again and spelling it out in some detail.
Mm-hmm.
But to be faced with insanity, with agitation, that
Mm-hmm.
that we are through our fractal identities connected to existentially, we are connected to the to this economic system, and you probably have had your fair share of criticism leveled at you in the past 30 years
Mm-hmm.
Every time you've come up, or we come up, or one comes up with alternatives to the current mode of economic productivity, oh, you want to go and live back in the trees? Is that what you want to do? You're a Luddite. That's a polite person speaking. You're a Luddite. You want to go back to what? Living in trees and farming with your own hands.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Good luck with that. You want to live in caves. As soon as you start criticizing the insanity, so what you're doing here with this appeal is suggesting we all understand that there's tension here between the system we live in. Sorry, we all understand that there's tension in the system we live in,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
but don't focus on the tension. It will waste your time. Pick your conflicts. Pick your resource allocation, your existential resource allocation. Pick the purpose in such a way that the outcome is constructive. That's
Well,
what you say.
yeah. I mean, the in everybody here knows I'm Muslim. If you don't, and I am. And one of the sciences that I studied is something called fiqh, and fiqh is really jurisprudence. It's how do you understand the it's law, right? But the point of law of is to understand where the most pregnant actions are, and also often to protect that. Okay, so within the human situation, there are many things that we could act on, but some of them are key. They're like nexus. They're like a nexus, and they're very pregnant. So you have to understand how to choose the most pregnant zones of action for you and the people around you and the world around you. Okay,
Mm,
because when and now I'm saying the human being not as something separate, so it's not man against nature, which is part of the insanity. It is man as nature.
man as nature.
Nature, we are nature. We are part of it. The insanity that in our education which sets us apart from that great order, as if we flew in from a spaceship, and there's some people who think that, yeah, to colonize the earth, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
which is because when man makes a model of the creation, he makes a model of himself. So that's the picture that some people, or the story that some people tell. The point is that we are here, and we have to find the most pregnant zones of action.
Hmm.
And so the one who then tells you that we want to take you back to the Stone Age,
Yes.
they're they are in the zone that they are benefiting, and that they fear that any changes they will not benefit. So what they are saying is that I prefer my subjugation, I prefer my alienation, I prefer my being being used to being
But
free. That's what they're saying, and it's fine if that's where they want to be. Then all they have to do is keep on doing what they're doing.
give us
The
a
point is
percentage.
hmm?
Give us a bit of a percentage. What is the distribution in the humanosphere? How many are we? 8 billion.
I don't care.
Okay.
Yeah, I care about the ones who are the seeds that want to grow something new.
This is. I don't know if the audience is feeling the same way I am feeling, but this is talk I can get behind. But let me play devil's advocate
Mm-hmm.
a little bit. Oh, that's a coward speech. That's something a coward would say, because now I'm channeling my Marxist friends. Because we have to bring the fight to the exploitation, the source of the exploitation, to the corporations, to the owners of the means of production, and that conflict is inevitable. It is
Good.
inevitable, and it's only a coward that would turn around and say, "Let me go and find something else to do," because And that's problematic because they will come after you. There
Of
is
course,
no
yeah.
extra capitalistic space to exist in.
Of course, they are coming after you, but they have to come. But they have to come after you. Yeah, you. It's not my business to be going after them. They are not. They are not the point. This Earth is older, vaster than them.
Ooh.
They are a blip in history.
Ooh. It's 1789. 1789 spinning Jenny. That's when this particular period of madness begins.
Yeah. So they are a blip. So the point here is that there is action that we must take to change the way that we relate to the world
Hmm. Hmm.
and what it brings forth.
Let's
Now,
let me.
if for the one caught in that insanity, because
Mhm.
one of the early things that I spoke about in the articles last year, right, we spoke about in the articles last year, was that Seth Horus cycle.
Mhm. Mhm.
The battle of empire with with chaos, right, and
Yes.
protecting you from chaos. What that person is
Absolutely.
saying is that I I I am in the order of Horus. I wish I fear chaos, and I see you as chaos. Well, good luck to them,
This is a
right?
lot to unpack. There's a lot to
Mhm.
unpack here, and I'd like the audience that has joined me on Instagram to be reminded that I would love to see you all at Dystopia Unmasked, which is our Substack account, because this particular platform is doing too many things to accounts that
Yeah.
speak of the world the way we are currently doing. And I would like to try to unpack some of the things you've said here. So the first thing is reminds me of Buckminster Fuller, where he says the best way to predict the future that you want to live in, I may be paraphrasing and adding a little bit, is to build it. You have
Yes.
to build. The best way to predict the future you want to live in is to build that future.
Yes.
Would you, how does that fit in with what you just said? Is it adjacent or is it in this
Well,
square in the middle?
I mean, I agree, but I would say it slightly differently,
Mm-hmm.
which is that you have to choose this the most precious thing you have is your life, your energy,
Mm.
and your time.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to choose where you put your life, your energy, and your time. That's your
Wow.
choice.
Mm-hmm.
For me, in the divine reckoning, I have to measure where I have put my energy, my life, and my choices, and that's it. As human beings.
This is this is you say very pregnant things
Mm-hmm.
with levity. You
Mm-hmm.
say, and my first reaction was, oh, that's an impressive way to speak to people because it speaks to an intangible. It speaks to what is life. I dare anyone to define life in a succinct and clear way. Um, what is life? What is time? And what is energy? You said, and these are all things that are at the core of every single one of us. Our life is juggling time and juggling energy. And you are saying, what you're saying is reclaim your energy, your time, and your life for purposes that do not serve the insanity. And I'd like for our audience to do a little something. I have a book here that has tried the exercise of summarizing the insanity in 7 points. Is a good friend of ours that I don't want to mention him here because I don't want to do propaganda for him. But in his book, he talks about what we are calling insanity here. He calls it the killing crisis economy as a description of the world we
Mm-hmm.
live in.
Mm-hmm.
And he identifies 7 crisis factors and he calls it a crisis cluster. responsible for the insanity we live in. And I'll bring it full circle. He says, and it's very similar to what you've been writing about. He says, the increase of monetization is crisis factor number one.
Hmm.
Monetization and the increase of it is part of the galloping insanity we live in. That which you in this conversation are, in my opinion, rightfully suggesting we should divest our life, our energy, and our time from.
Or invest our
Thank you.
life, our energy, and our time in some in directions that are pregnant for us.
Could you just tell the audience what you just did here? Because this is also at the core of dystopia unmasked as an intellectual style. Because dystopia unmasked is a collective, but there is an intellectual style here for those who care to seek it out. What I just did was I focused on the negative. I said divest. And immediately you came back and said, hold on a second. We are not talking about the negation of things. We are talking about the construction of things.
Yes, yes, yes,
It's and that is the quintessential to the intellectual style of what we're calling here overgrowing in this collective.
yes, yes.
And I noticed, and I stand corrected, because I came with divest life, energy, and time from the
Hmm.
insanity. And you said, hold on a second, it's not about pulling away, it's about focusing, as you suggested, from the firt. Am I saying right? Firt?
Hmm.
Firta?
Fitra.
This fitra. So if I were to say I need to study this, I need to understand systematically what the epistemology, what the methodology of this style of thinking is. Would I have to go to fitra and study that a little bit? Would I have to
Well,
read up on that?
it will help. I mean, okay, so I can give you some context. I mean, because I remember that there's this article about waste, right? That we
Yes.
want to, yeah, or the podcast, yeah, that we want to talk about. But
Mm-hmm.
Allah says in the Quran, He says, "Fatara samawati wal ard." He says that He splits the heavens and the earth. Okay,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
so you see, heavens, earth, He split it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the one of the principles of the universe is splitting, right?
Ooh.
And differentiation,
Mm.
so that as as people we are then differentiated from that, as each of us having a nature, and and as a species having a nature.
Mm.
And that part of stewardship is to recognize the nature and needs of every phenomenon.
Mm-hmm.
And justice is to treat each phenomenon according to its nature, giving it its right.
Ooh. Mm.
Okay?
Mm-hmm.
So, what we are saying is that the way that we are treating the earth and ourselves
Mm-hmm.
and our ecology and waste is not in harmony with the nature of those things.
Mm-hmm.
So, in its foundations, it is an oppression not only against ourselves
Yes.
but against everything.
If I could come in right here, this conversation reminds me of if you look at how we started the conversation,
Hmm.
I threw the question not quite innocently into the group. Um, what are the basic needs of nature? And interestingly, as the insanity we've been talking about, the problematic mode of economic existence that dominates on the planet right now, causes depletion and pollution.
Hmm.
Depletion and pollution harm the bioecological system that we are born into by diminishing, reducing symbiosis and the requisite of symbiosis, diversity. It seems, because you said a few minutes ago, and I wanted to latch on that, you said Mother Nature, Earth, is much older. This 250-year-old system that we are contending with here is a blip compared to the complexity of the interoperationalization of the different subsystems of the ecosystem. And it seems that, according to biologists and ecologists, the key sort of DNA of nature is diversity and symbiosis interacting through time and space in different climatic zones, in different spheres, the aquisphere, the oceans, and here on Earth, on the lithosphere, where we have all types of vegetation, flora, and fauna. And so diversity and symbiosis seem to be the indicators of how nature works, how nature was set up to work.
Okay. Um, the universe works in the way that it does. You notice I don't use the word nature very much,
Mm-hmm.
but the
Mm-hmm.
universe works in the way that it does.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it, it, that principle of splitting and mixing and principle and different aspects coming so that kullu yawmin huwa fi sha'n. Every day he
Every
is on a
day,
new matter, right?
every day is an new month.
Right. So each moment something new, sha'n, because
Mm-hmm.
also shan comes from shay'a, which is a word. Sorry, which is a word. There's an Arabic word for that, which is like mashallah, inshallah, shay,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Oh, I see.
Shay,
Mm-hmm.
which is thing, but also shay has in its meaning what is intended. Okay, so that what you're seeing in the universe is the emergence in every moment of new matters.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
what
Mm-hmm.
what our order is trying to do is to restrict it
To restrict it.
to the things that profits it, in the belief that man is the lord of the universe and can make claim to it,
Thank you.
not just part of it as a creature with a responsibility, but man is its overlord. And
Fragmentation. Sorry, you were saying?
no, I'm yeah. So
But
that
this is.
what happens is that because we seek to restrict it in that way,
Mm-hmm.
then out of it, the bits that you cannot, um, that are not profitable for you, are become what we call waste.
We spoke about this about approximately a year ago. The nature of I use the word nature again. The
No, no, it's okay. I
approach.
mean, you have your language. I'm just saying that's my language.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, I get it.
Mm-hmm.
So the approach to making sense of reality, out of which capitalism was born, is uh, an approach dedicated and wedded to control, to
Yes,
controlling matter.
yes.
And it is through fragmentation. And if you look etymologically at the root of the term analysis, through fragmentation and uh, what is a synonymous word, breaking down things to their minuscule particles, and we end up with atoms. Well, we end up with molecules and the component atoms, and in the atoms we end up with quarks, and at some point, if we go further down, we end up with neutrinos, and research on that. So the control of matter
Mm-hmm.
has led to, in the process of breaking down and splitting things, to knowledge about the implications, energetically speaking, materially speaking, of this process of discovery of what happens if we break it ever further down. And that particular aspect is also part of the insanity. Um, because the pursuit of knowledge, the pursuit of insight, in service of a desire to control, in service which itself is in service of a desire. You mentioned this in the podcast, which I strongly recommend you to go and listen to make more sense of this conversation. The pursuit of profitability. So you mentioned it in the conversation that ultimately, and you mentioned it here, of course, is that n- politics and economics on this planet are subjected to the pursuit of the profit motive. And that pursuit of the profit motive goes hand in hand with diminutive, the diminutive scope of attention that you've just
Ye-
focused on here.
Yeah. Because if you take the profit motive is one of the motives of man. But
Mm,
so what you do is you restrict man only to the profit motive,
mm,
right?
hmm.
That's
You
why
restrict.
Nietzsche. That's why Nietzsche, when in I think genealogy of morals, I think it is,
Hmm.
where he
Hmm.
talks about God is dead, right?
I was thinking
When the
about that this
madman
week.
goes to the marketplace, right,
Hmm.
and he says God is dead, he says you killed him and you imprisoned him in your churches.
Hmm.
The church is a sepulcher, for, right?
Hmm.
But where does he go? He goes to the market, okay? And people don't, it's a very coded lesson about what is going on,
Hmm.
that it is market principles which have entombed every morality other than it,
Thank you.
locked it in a place. So the in the separation of church and state, in the this and the that, right, locked it in its space, and going, okay, no, 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 it is the profit motive
Hmm.
that is the ultimate good, and the result of this imbalance is this.
I can't help my rapper brain. The profit motive versus the prophet's motives. It's the profit motive. It's people have a choice to make. Are you pursuing the profit motive or the prophet's motive? Um, and it's and there is we've spoken about this too because I learned last week on this podcast that there is no such thing as Islamic banking or Islamic economics as such. Is that correct?
Well, some people say اقتصادنا, which is possible, but banking as an institution
Mm-hmm.
is so fundamentally unjust and
Mm.
and 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 deceptive,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
that it cannot fit within it cannot fit within a legal system that it has not corrupted.
Ooh. Banking cannot fit within a legal system that it has not corrupted, ladies and gentlemen. And the corruption, the nature of the corruption itself is also tied in the pursuit of the profit motive over the interests of the commons, which is another important
Yeah.
point in the overgrowing philosophy.
Well, and I think it's really important to grasp about banking
Hmm.
is that banking itself is not trade. It is the embedding of of structural financial injustice into the nature of economy, and the the gathering of the wealth principle from a community and the weaponization of it against them, right? So
It
it
took.
gathers it, and it says, okay, so we give this money to that one, right? So
Hmm.
the
Hmm.
banking is a principle. In its principle, it is the occultation of of financial power, right? By transforming it into something that is no longer truly financial, but it becomes an abstracted occult, it's an abstracted tool
Mm-hmm.
of representation. It is not wealth in itself. It represents something. So what we're saying is that in order to create this kind of economy, what you do by this constant restriction into what benefits only a small group eventually of humanity, which is what we call an oligarchy,
Mm-hmm.
is that it has to profoundly change the way that we talk about wealth, that we talk about the world,
Mm.
that we talk about waste in order to produce what benefits it and absolves it of the responsibility of the consequences of its actions.
Mm. This is quite deep stuff, and this is a call. You're calling onto this is not just mere analysis and diagnosis of the state of the world. This is also, and when I look at your eyes like this, I feel some kind of some kind of existential dis dis disbelief at the reality that we're confronted with, that we're living in. Hence the moment where you say, good, I've seen enough. I've seen enough. It is on us now to build something new. I have some points that I want to bring up on that, because basically you're saying you challenge human creativity to come up with something more in tune with with I would say symbiosis and diversity.
But this is what we do. We're human beings,
But
right?
would you?
This
But
this this here that we have is not. Of course, it's unique amongst man.
mm-hmm,
Every time human beings have made a civilization, it's unique.
mm-hmm,
Okay, this is
mm-hmm.
what we do.
But it's extremely. I need the right word here. What we're doing right now is extremely unsustainable. It depletes the ecosystem and it pollutes the ecosystem. Excuse me to point that out to our audience. Each and every single one of us, according to a recent Guardian article, has microplastics in his testicles and in her ovaries. What is this?
Okay,
What kind of.
so this no no this is not unsustainable. This is death. This is a death world. It's a death religion. It is committed to dying and telling you that you are not the one. If you do it like this, you're not the one who's going to die. They over there will and we'll be okay, right?
This is
Whilst
important. This is important. Can you expound a little bit on this? Not to get you off track, but what do you mean by they over there will die and we will survive?
well, we are in the last 30 years. I have seen the explosion of packaging and rubbish.
Mm-hmm.
So the we have the convenience and we throw it in the bin and it's going to go somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be okay. There's
Mm-hmm.
a point at which you see that and you know that it must have consequences, but it's going to be okay. We're going to solve it, right? But we're
Mm-hmm.
putting it over there. And so somebody else is going to deal with that problem.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So in it, the implications of this, like
Mm-hmm.
the Middle East, they have oil. If they are paid a fair price for their oil, it will become the richest and most powerful part of the planet. As a result, they cannot be allowed to do so. So
1976.
yes, 19 well, Sykes Picot.
Even before that.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
Sykes Picot. Um, and before
What,
Sykes Picot, right?
what
Because
is Sykes-Picot? Sykes-Picot's 1917. Is that correct?
it's 19. Yeah, I think it's 1916. I'm not sure. Yeah,
16 or 17. Mm-hmm.
it's during the first war. It's during the First World War.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, and so no, no, I think you're right. Anyway, it doesn't matter. I don't remember those things. You know that.
Well, it's just just trying to sort of show the temporal scope, because you did mention just a few minutes ago we are talking about where to direct attention, and one could say human attention is the product of time, energy, and life, directed at what to construct or what to serve.
Yeah. Yeah. So what you're dealing with here is the choice to control. The British made a choice to control oil as a resource.
Mm-hmm.
And when their empire fell, the Americans took the reins of the control of oil as a resource.
Yes.
Okay. And
Hmm.
so, in order that we can be warm in the winter, those people must die,
That part. And
right?
this is something they don't get. The majority of my European friends
But that is
outside
because,
of outside of
yeah,
political circles, sorry. But
yeah.
please,
No,
please.
no, no, no. I'm just saying that that's because always, and it's something we spoke about in the podcast, is always a language is manufactured
Mm-hmm.
in order to ensure that you can distance yourself and abstract yourself, which hides the consequences for
Mm.
somebody else to pick up.
Mm.
Okay, so it acts this in our system. We act in ways that will produce we act in ways. So we're doing what we're doing. We're producing the we have all of the packaging. We don't do anything with the packaging,
Mm-hmm.
right? In our lives, when we were hunting and or you had cattle, you shared the wool. You make you make cloth, right, etc. And then people would make things. People made linen. They come out. You take milk. You make cheese,
Mm-hmm.
right? Our part of what happened is that in order to ensure that as a population we can be restricted to the profit motive, is that we we gave up the cattle for a job and became the cattle that are farmed.
Could you just say two, three words about the historical um political economy of the sentence you just said? Because that was a metaphor. That was metaphorical. But this is
Yes,
history.
yes, because there was a time when people lived on land. Often the land was theirs. In Europe it was a bit different. The land belonged to a particular oligarchic class,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then gave you usage, right, which has become the basic template for property law around the world.
Mm-hmm.
So but in other places, people, their land was theirs, and on the land you'd have cattle, and from the cattle, etc., you you farmed and you looked after your cattle. And there are things which you extract, you the milk, the in the Sahel, the milk, the yogurt. Yeah. I don't know if you like kindirimo or fura.
I'll have all of it.
Yeah. um so all of this here, what happened is that you take people off the land, they,
Mm-hmm.
and you drive them to the cities to get jobs and develop the economy.
Mm-hmm.
And whereas they were the ones farming the cattle, they then find themselves farmed as cattle in cities
Fine.
in which sometimes they scarcely own the land, and they must pay rent to a landlord, and and all of this, you know the leasehold of this, the whole structure of of um of European coloniality exported around the world as progress.
And this begins, I remember from my history classes in Germany at the beginning of the 19th century, 1809 ish, when this
Mhm.
begins and the laws begin to change to allow for the expropriation of those who had some land, and begin to make people dependent on working in factories in wherever they are.
Yeah. Well,
And
the Germans were following the British economy, so.
exactly.
Mhm.
Now, I'd like to. We have about, in principle, we have about 7 minutes to
10 minutes
go.
left. Yeah.
But allow me to summarize, maybe, because we mentioned insanity, that the system that we live in, because of it, how it depletes and pollutes the world, um, and because of how difficult it is to envision. Well, this particular podcast, this particular collective, has picked up the challenge of envisioning the construction of a world that is less polluting for our testicles. I say it like that because, you know, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, the counter argument that we discussed a bit earlier was much more facile, much easier to throw at us. Oh, you want to go and live in the bushes again? You want to live in the cages again? No, I just want
Well,
the
in the
God-given
80s, I remember we had acid rain
acid rain. I
because
just
we get,
want
yeah.
my I have to get this one off. I just want my God-given marbles back. I don't want any plastic and micro stuff, and that can't be asking for too much. It cannot be that the demand for consistency, and that's a term I'd like to throw into this conversation: ecological consistency with the principles of how the ecosystem functions. And I did some research before we came in here, and I'd like to mention the following. It is that Mother Nature has what can be called autopoetic self repair capabilities, composting, simply composting. If you put the vegetables, if you put the vegetables or the human body or whatever you put into the environment, into the ecosystem, there is we are biodegradable, and the essentially this capability of nature to biodegrade its own products and to repurpose its own products by changing the consistency and the density. Yes, please, you're coming in.
No, 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 come on.
Through processes of degradation, etc. I looked into it and I came up with the following insight, which I think might be helpful. Everybody knows about the H2O water molecules, the CO2, the carbon dioxide. There's apparently CH4 that is essential, methane, in the Earth's autopoietic systems of rejuvenation and regeneration. Nitrogen, sulfur, and other such chemicals we don't have to go through, but it's not too many. It's not too many. If you can look it up, it's H2O, CO2, CH4, N, S, P, and K based compounds. These are the chemical compounds that Mother Nature breaks things down with. These are the compounds that Mother Nature builds things up with, um, ultimately. And now we have these synthetic chemical compounds that have come to add themselves into these building blocks of nature, out of which nature seems to be creative enough to come up with everything from the platypus to me. It's, I hope
Okay.
you notice there's some difference between a platypus and myself, but you know, you.
I'm looking hard to make sure that I can spot them.
But this is this whole diversity symbiosis thing that I was talking about. And so I feel like your proposition of overgrowing inspires people to go to these building blocks and look at how these building blocks can be freed and liberated from the externalities of the insanity. And if you would allow me, I'll just want to read to you the 7 crisis cluster points and get some feedback from you because they're paralleled, you know his mind, symmetrically with 7 living points that might inspire the idea of overgrowing. And I'd like to hear you on that. So, the 7 crisis points, he says, is monetization of everything, the commodification of everything is part of the killing crisis economy. The crisis economy factor number 2, increasing globalization. that is the globalization of money and investment, not a globalization of cultural and people exchange. Increasing privatization is the third crisis cluster variable. The fourth crisis cluster variable is increasing stockholder power over the commons, over the sense of the commons. The fifth crisis factor is increasing labor productivity without labor. And we're moving into this revolution that is coming with AI and robotics, um, where humans apparently are planned to become obsolete in the production process as far as possible. Let's see how far they get with that, but it is proceeding. The sixth crisis cluster variable is the economist production. So they produce economists and they produce the economist mind state and lord it over intellectual conversations. Apparently, if you do not speak economies, neoliberalese, you're not an intellectual and you're not part of the clerical caste that determines where humanity goes henceforth.
Yes. Yes.
And yeah,
Mhm.
and
No,
alas,
listen.
the seventh crisis cluster element of the world we live in right now is the centralization of military industrial surveillance systems into the economy, encrusted deep within. And this is something that I can't stress enough. Try to imagine 900 billion US dollars of military investment, 900 US military dollars, US military dollars, and then 200 billion Chinese and 120 billion Russian. That's how much money is going into the production of military capability in this insane economic system.
Yes, of course, because it is because the world's greatest democracy needs to have the most effective army in the world, not in order to protect itself, but to police and control the world. So and
And you're
that is
being
this.
polite. I feel like
And
you're being very, very, very
I'm
euphemistic.
deliberately being polite. I mean, and the Chinese and the Russians who also arm themselves to the teeth,
Hmm.
we should know that they're arming themselves to the teeth in that way for our own good,
Hmm.
just as the Americans are. Yeah.
Hmm.
Okay, but the point here is, I think, because I think we're at the end of our time.
Hmm.
But the point here is that you're describing
Hmm.
how our world is organized,
Hmm.
and that is organized in that way by because you're describing a an ideological
Hmm.
system for restricting the use of the imagination and intellect of people,
Mm.
so that it is colonially aligned with a system that produces profit for a few, right? That is why that so what you've just read to me is the doctrine
Hmm.
which is designed to produce this.
Hmm.
I'm saying that we don't need to fight against that. They are killing themselves
And us.
and us. What we have to do is to begin to turn to that which gives life to us.
Quick question.
Because it gives, hold on, because it
Yep.
also gives life to them.
Come again.
And
Come again.
because it also gives life to them.
Hmm.
And the fundamental issue here is that we as people we must choose either a life system, or a life, not a system, but a life project based upon that is biotechnological. So we give technologies for life, and
Mm-hmm.
we organize ourselves for life,
Mm-hmm.
or that remains necro technological, which is that it organizes and restricts for death, because that is what we are doing. We have produced a death world, and 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 we call it civilization, and
But
it
the
is a it,
life, but Mr. Carberry, when was life expectancy ever as high as it is now? When did humans ever have their basic needs covered to the point of plentiness? We throw food away. When you speak of death
I
world,
would I would suggest that people go back and read or George Orwell's criticism of these arguments in
mm,
1984.
mm,
George
mm,
Orwell says, he says, go prove it. Right? We have now discovered that the Harappian civilization, right, which is God knows how long ago, and often many of the Middle Eastern civilizations had sewer systems.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
Okay,
mm-hmm,
we don't know what their lifespan was.
mm-hmm,
They had sewer systems, right? So they were aware of the requirement of hygiene,
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
because in Europe they were still throwing their shit and urine on the streets in, until the 1700s and beyond. In many cases, that does not mean that that was the world.
mm-hmm.
And so, of course, we may go into different places, and we cannot cherry pick. We can't cherry pick that which only suits our vision of history. Mankind is vast. There have been many experiments of human beings. If we must focus on what gives life, and if something is necropolitical and requires your enslavement in order to be what it is, and that is okay with you, then that is your choice. But don't expect me to swallow that shit and be happy with it.
And there's so much that we could do, so much more. I hope we can return to this particular element and leg of this many-legged conversations that we've been having and that we will be having. I just want to bring in a few words in closing from Khadija, a member of the Dystopia on Mass Collective, which I think is a crowning closing statement in the write-up that I have here from her. A point that the collective is going to be focused on and working on is towards a regenerative future. A regenerative future. What does a regenerative economy look like in practice? These are some questions that will come to anyone who, as I picture you, when you talk about how you look at the world as it is, I see you with your little hat and your sweatshirt there, looking at the system, and then you just go, okay, this is not for me. You turn around, and as you're walking away to build something bigger or different, more in line with regenerative, ecological, and health principles, the question is, what kinds of questions will that new emanate from? And I find Khadija's list absolutely beautiful. What does a regenerative economy look like in practice? Nothing less than that. How can we redefine prosperity away from extraction and accumulation? What can we learn from indigenous and ancestral knowledge? What practices already exist that center sustainability and reciprocity? And from theory to action, how do we take radical imagination beyond discourse and into lived, embodied change? How do we take radical imagination beyond discourse and into lived, embodied change? These are the questions that I'd like to leave our audience with, and with an invitation. I'll leave you the last word, but my invitation to the audience is, please plow through the collection of articles that have been deposited on this website that you're watching us on, Dystopia Unmasked, you will find much depth, much background conversation on the points that we've been talking about here. Um, Please subscribe if you haven't subscribed. I invite you to do so. And the more the merrier. Try to get as many people to at least watch this video that will be up on Dystopia Unmasked. Watch the previous videos. Watch and listen to the previous podcast. Read the articles. Basically, um, join us. Join us in thinking about setting up a better world, and let's get
Yeah.
let's build the collective. Let's
Yeah.
grow.
Yeah. Let's. I mean, yeah. Join us in building a new world. Yeah. It's always a
Thank you very
pleasure.
much. Thank you
My
very much for
pleasure.
your
My
time,
pleasure.
Alex.
Thank you so much. All right.
Dystopia Unmasked. That's where you'll find us
Thank you.
on Substack.